Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT Psychotherapy. The George Brassey podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Freeze doesn't stop Chicago Heights City Council from taking care of business. Freeze doesn't stop Chicago Heights City Council from taking care of business. Chicago Heights, Illinois, despite some members of the council being absent, freezing weather and meeting remotely due to COVID restrictions, on Tuesday night the Chicago Heights City Council approved a number of projects to continue moving forward the city's beautification projects. Architectural services. With Alderman Vincent Zaranti sitting in as acting mayor for Mayor David Gonzalez, the council approved an agreement for architectural services with Tria Architecture. Under the $23,000 agreement, Tria will provide a space needs analysis of the municipal garage and water department facilities. The company will analyze existing facilities and determine whether an upgrade or a totally new facility is needed, based on current and future needs. Tria has provided architectural services for other local municipalities such as Country Club Hills, designing its amphitheater, storage and fleet maintenance facilities, and upgrading its recreational center. Morton Arboretum Grant. The council voted to accept an award of $15,000 from the Morton Arboretum, through its Urban and Community Forestry Grant. The grant will pay for a tree inventory of the city. Funding for the grant is provided by the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forestry Program. It offers urban and community forestry grants to municipalities, which are required to pass a tree preservation/protection ordinance before the end of the grant period. Engineering services. The council also approved proposals totaling $842,000 for engineering services for various city infrastructure projects. Chief of Staff Karen Zarant said the projects include sewer and resurfacing work around the city. The council approved an agreement with Grand Capital, North America, LLC, to induce the sale and development of the city-owned real estate at 560 and 570 West Lincoln Highway. Jack Hines, city economic development consultant, said the parcels are the sites of the former Lorenzetti's restaurant and car lot next to it. Grand Rapid Capital has done a number of developments in the city. In other business, Chief of Staff Karen Zarant gave the council an update on January's Illinois Department of Public Health vaccination clinic, hosted by the city. She said about 250 people registered online. The city plans to hold another vaccination clinic, in conjunction with IDPH, in February. Chicago Heights Fire Chief Jeffrey Springer announced the promotion of Captain Tony Mascalino to Assistant Fire Chief. The council approved a redevelopment agreement to induce the sale of the city-owned surplus real estate at 1902 Euclid Avenue, through the city's Abandoned Property Acquisition Program. And the city's city towing services agreement was renewed. Freeze doesn't stop Chicago Heights City Council from taking care of business.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey podcast. I'm so glad to welcome our next guest to the podcast. Matt Luzi is the author of The Boys in Chicago Heights, The Forgotten Crew of the Chicago Outfit. Matt, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks a lot, George. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we're recording this on January 6th, 2021, and this won't come out for a few more weeks. So I kind of wanted to just get your thoughts on the situation that is currently going on in Washington, D.C., when the Electoral College met to certify the results of the 2021 election. And, well, many of President Trump's supporters are currently in the Capitol right now doing who knows what. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, what's going on right now as it happens.
I mean, I just don't think it's acceptable. I understand that you're frustrated, but we have a process in place, and we have a democratic process in place, and that is that we have a vote every 4 years for president, and we need to follow that process through, respect it, and let it take its course. If you're not satisfied with it, then you have another chance to vote in 4 years. And if you don't like it, you can support candidates that support your agenda and try to get them to run for office and maybe get elected. But that's our process, and I think that's what we need to respect.
Matt, you're a student of history. Have you ever read or seen anything analogous to this in your readings of American history?
No, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that certainly not in my lifetime, and I don't think that I've really read anything that comes close to this. I think it was Andrew Jackson's presidency that was tumultuous, and so was his inauguration, but I don't recall anything like this. I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I don't think so.
Yeah, there certainly has been incidents of mob violence and mob rule, but
actually, breaching the Capitol and getting in. I saw a photo of somebody actually on the dais yelling out that Trump won the election. That's just that sends a very for us as the United States, in my opinion. It really has potential to weaken our process and weaken our standing throughout the world.
And as we record this, the president just put out a video kind of telling his supporters to go home. He still loves them. It's mind-blowing to see it.
It is, especially when you consider that just a day or two ago he was calling for them to show up. So I don't. It's not much consolation that he's telling them to go home now.
Well, he literally was speaking to them earlier this afternoon.
Yeah,
I think with the historical aspect of this, we've never really, at least in the modern era, had a president who is kind of goading his supporters to behave like this. There's something it feels less than presidential this entire 4 years, and
right.
This might just be the raw of that.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of all this. We're talking, and this is all taking place. So it's too early to tell, I think, to see how this is all going to play out, but it's certainly going to be interesting. But, I do go back to the thought that this is what we are as a democracy, and we need to respect that at the end of the day, whether you like it or not. I worked in politics for a number of years, and I worked on several campaigns, and we won some and we lost some. But for the ones that we lost, we regrouped, and we supported our candidates the next time around. Tried to get them elected the next time, but we always respected that.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, let's talk about something a little less depressing. How about we talk about your book, The Boys in Chicago Heights? Tell me,
Yeah, certainly.
what led you to writing this book?
Um, Really, it was my family's background and their connections. My family settled in Chicago Heights when they came from Italy, at least on my grandfather's side. My grandmother's side, well, she ended up living in Chicago Heights. Her family actually came to Chicago after coming from Italy. But as a kid, I started hearing stories that I thought were interesting, stories about Al Capone and his relationship to Chicago Heights, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. But what really set me on the path to researching it was kind of a funny story. As a grade schooler, we had show and tell one day, and there was a girl that got up and talked about somebody famous in her family, and I went home and my mom was asking about school that day, and I said, well, we had show and tell, and this girl got up and she was talking about some famous relatives. And I asked my mom if we had anybody famous in our family. And she said, well, not on my side of the family, but on your father's side, there's some folks that are that are gangsters. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean gangsters? So, well, you'd have to ask around and ask your father maybe or your grandfather. So I did. I started asking questions and came to realize that my great grandmother's brother was Frank Laporte, who eventually became one of the outfit bosses in charge of Chicago Heights. So from that point forward, which that really piqued my curiosity. That point forward, I started collecting as much information as I could, reading books. I started going to the library, researching newspapers, and found out that the Chicago Heights Library was a real good resource. There's a lot of history there about the immigrants from the turn of the last century, and that stuff was a lot of help. But I also researched the Chicago Tribune. And then once I started gathering more information, I started doing interviews and talks with people that were still around at the time that would be able to fill in some of the gaps, I guess. So one thing led to another, and it got to a point where I thought, well, I've got all this information, and it might be fun to actually do something with it, and ended up publishing the book.
So one of the things I find interesting in your book is not just the history of organized crime, but it's also kind of a good historical account of some of the factors going on in the city of Chicago Heights around the turn of the century. So can you start by telling us who Charles Wacker is?
Yeah, sure. Charles Wacker was a businessman and developer from Chicago. Most locals would recognize him as the person that Wacker Drive is named after. But he had started to look around and scope out different areas outside of the city of Chicago where he might be able to develop land for the purpose of having manufacturing and businesses operate. That was at a time when Chicago was really expanding. There wasn't too much regulation, so it was becoming really crowded. There wasn't, the taxes were high. While it was served by certainly the railroads, certain areas of the city were becoming more difficult to get in and out of, to move goods around because it was becoming so congested. So those sorts of factors played into Wacker deciding that, it might be beneficial to start looking around to areas outside of the city where we might be able to attract investors and manufacturers and have them, grow their businesses. So he ended up putting together a trust, and that trust settled on the area that's now known as Chicago Heights. They bought up a lot of the land, they parceled it out, and they started advertising to attract the businesses that they thought would be a good fit. And sure enough, they attracted the steel mills, other manufacturers, some chemical facilities, food manufacturers. There's a whole host of different types of businesses and manufacturers that they attracted. Once those started to develop, you need people to work in those places. So the land trust, they also started to kind of lay out neighborhoods where people could live, people that would work in the factories. So they, laid out the neighborhoods that are now known as, the Hill, the East Side, West Side. Those core areas or neighborhoods in Chicago Heights. They also developed the downtown area. You have to have those types of businesses, grocery stores, tailors, barber shops, etc. To support the workers and the factories. So it all kind of grew up organically from Wacker and his efforts, and really got Chicago Heights off the ground.
Talk a little bit about the importance of the Lincoln Highway and the Dixie Highway intersection, like you do in.
Yeah, so, sure. So they settled on Chicago Heights, and one of the main reasons for that is because of its proximity to Dixie Highway and Lincoln Highway, the intersection there. And the automobile was just starting to come around. And so, I think they also sort of knew, well, we could move further out from the city because the automobile is really going to help to move people around. It's going to help to move goods around. And, in order to be able to have the vehicles move goods and people and so forth, you have to have infrastructure available. And Lincoln Highway was already there and being developed. A really good east-west thoroughfare to move goods in and out of Chicago Heights to other places.
Yeah, and those big highways they predate the interstate expressways, so they've been around for a long time, and they really.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the things that's really defined the city is the automobile throughout its
Right.
history. And as a member of the city council, one of the things I seek to advocate for is to make the city more walkable and bikeable. But that's neither here nor there. But so what were you going to say, Matt?
No, that's, and I think that was also what they were sort of looking at too, when they were developing the core downtown area. And that of course brought in, department stores and a library, and those sorts of things. And it was walkable. So, for folks that didn't have a car, because the car was just emerging at the time, you could easily walk from, the east side over to downtown Chicago Heights, maybe to Halstead and Illinois Street or something like that. And, everything you needed was right there.
Yeah. Well, and at this point, it's kind of difficult to commute just on a daily basis without a car. I think that's one of our big challenges that I'm hoping the city council will continue to address. Matt, let's talk about what was the Italian American population like during the period that you wrote your book?
Well, it was emerging during that period. Certainly, with the advent of the manufacturing facilities, and as I was saying, once those were built, they needed workers, and the owners of those factories, they put the word out through advertisements, mainly. Not only in the Chicago area, but throughout the United States, and even over to Europe and the places where they knew that people were interested in maybe getting away from the lifestyle that that wasn't being very easy. So Italy was one of those places, and it probably started with sort of a trickle. Maybe there was a few people that decided, it might be worth giving it a shot. So they moved from Italy to Chicago Heights, got a job. Once they became established, a lot of it became word of mouth. And so, the folks that arrived first would send back word for their family members and friends. And so it started to grow. So you were seeing an Italian immigrant population in the early 1900s, maybe only in the hundreds of people. I think by 1920, it was in the tens of thousands. And they were the largest ethnic group in the city at that time.
Talk a bit about how the Prohibition era kind of helped some of the factors that led to the Chicago outfit coming into being able to make Chicago Heights.
Yeah, that sort of ushered in the whole era of organized crime in Chicago Heights, and I don't mean to imply that it was all the Italians, or that it was only Italians, or that it was something because of the way the Italians were that they were the only ones involved in organized crime. They certainly weren't. They just happened to be the largest group of immigrants in Chicago Heights at that time, and they were the ones that they had the resources through their connections, their family connections, their friends, and for some of them for their businesses. So before Prohibition, if they owned a trucking company, or if they owned a confectionery business, things like that would help to manufacture alcohol after Prohibition, they already had sort of the infrastructure to do that. But they also had some political capital. Before Prohibition was ushered in, there was an alderman who was an Italian immigrant. His name was Antonio Sanfilippo, and he became a pretty prominent politician in the Italian community. He also became the first racketeer. Indications are that he was probably running rackets before Prohibition, maybe gambling or slot machines, things like that. But after Prohibition was ushered in, he kind of turned his attention to the manufacture and sale of alcohol. He had a pretty strong organization, but being criminals and being opportunists, two of his top guys saw an opportunity for themselves, and they actually had Sanfilippo killed and took over his operations. From there, it was, and these guys were, what was interesting is these guys were Sicilian. So there were, even within the Italian community, at least at that time, the immigrants were very insular amongst themselves, although they were, they also had to stick together at the same time. So, they kind of stuck together for their mutual benefit, but at the same time, they didn't maybe necessarily trust each other. So you had this group of Sicilians that were kind of the dominant figures in organized crime, but then you had these non-Sicilian Italians that also were running rackets and alcohol operations. And it wasn't long before these groups started fighting amongst each other, the Sicilians and non-Sicilians, mainly because the Sicilians were charging for protection, street tax, for the other alcohol producers, but they weren't really giving anything in return. So in 1926, there was a pretty significant gang war in Chicago Heights, and it was largely the Sicilian Italians versus the Sicilians. And they were led by a group, a guy named Dominic Roberto and his top ally, Jim Emery, and Roberto's cousin, who was Frank Laporte, my great-grandmother's brother. Those guys ended up being victorious, and they took over and consolidated all the rackets. They ended up doing that with the help of Al Capone. They were Capone's allies, or vice versa.
I think that's a good place to bring in Al Capone, but also to just kind of put this disclaimer out there that the organized crime and everything, this is part of the city's lore, but there was actual people whose lives were impacted and hurt by the criminal
Very much
behavior that
so.
was going
Yeah,
on.
very much so. I didn't, and on that note, I didn't get into this because I was trying to, I guess, glorify these guys, um, or that I in any way idolize them. I don't. They were criminals. I just thought it was interesting from my perspective as a matter of history and family background, and kind of how and why uh, they turned to crime. Uh, and I think I discovered several factors for that reason. Um, I think they did it because they didn't have a lot of opportunities otherwise, and the easy money was just too great. And frankly, they could spread that money around, that illegal money around, and gain more political capital and actually boost themselves up out of the poverty that they were in, and kind of bring themselves up on the next rung of the social ladder.
Absolutely. Yeah, you do a great job in this book in just telling these stories. And it's got to be very interesting for you to have that personal connection to this history. So give us a rundown of exactly what was Al Capone's role in the city of Chicago Heights during his life.
Yeah, he before the Chicago Heights gang war erupted, Al Capone, of course, was from New York. He came to Chicago. He was brought in by a guy named Johnny Torrio, who was also from New York, and brought out by he was brought out to protect the interests of his uncle Jim Colosimo, who was a Chicago racketeer. So when Prohibition broke out, kind of similar to what Alderman Sanfilippo's men did to him, Torrio did to his uncle Jim Colosimo, and that was that he had him killed so he could take over his operations. So Al Capone was one of Torrio's top guys, and when they were expanding their rackets after Colosimo was killed, one of the places they expanded to was Chicago Heights, also Calumet City. But they had a roadhouse out in the Heights, and they were also indications are they were also getting a cut of the rackets that were happening in Chicago Heights. So when these Sicilian gangsters took over the Heights itself, they sort of pushed out Torrio and Capone. And Chicago Heights was a huge revenue stream for them. So when Dominic Roberto and Jim Emery started to push back on the Sicilians in the Heights, they aligned themselves with Capone because they knew that Capone would be interested in reestablishing his rackets, or at least his cut of them, in the Heights. And they were right. Capone joined forces with them. It's not like, and when I say that, it was not like Capone himself, but sending them resources, money, men, whatever they needed to help and assist in the gang war that took place. And then once they did that, and once they consolidated all the various racketeers, they were brought into the Capone outfit, and that's really when the Chicago Heights crew of the Chicago outfit was established.
Matt,
So that was around 1927.
Matt, we've only scratched the surface on this great book that you've written. What are two books that you would recommend to the audience that have been influential to you?
Captive City by Ovid Damaris, and Capone by John Kobler. Those were two great books about one about Capone specifically, and the other about the broader Chicago outfit. Captive City was written in the late 60s, but it's extremely comprehensive and goes into great detail about the machinations of the outfit and Illinois politics and how those two things sort of paired together.
Very interesting. Matt, are you any plans for another book in the future?
No, not yet. I get that question often, but you know, as far as the Chicago Heights outfit information goes, I don't know that there's any more to be written. I have kind of maybe thought about taking what I've written and expanding it a little bit. You know, I have discovered other bits and pieces of information that people might find interesting. I'm just not. I haven't really thought it through and figured out how it could be done, or even if there would be any interest in it. But I suppose that might be a possibility.
Yeah, definitely. And Matt, where can the people find you on the internet if they want to learn more about you or your work?
Yeah, sure. I'm on. They can find me on Facebook, or I don't know if anybody wants to email me. It's my email address is published in the book, but I'll give it out here. My email address is luzimjl@gmail.com. They can also find the book on Amazon, and you know, I've got an author page set up there as well.
Great. Well, Matt, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and you have a great night.
Thanks, George. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.